Hey everybody, and welcome to Views on Vue. I'm Ben Hong, Senior Front-End Engineer at GitLab, and today on our panel we have Fritz, core team member extraordinaire and one of the people responsible for the amazing docs we know and love.
Hello!
And today our guest is Ari. Ari, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ari Clark. I'm a senior UI UX engineer at a company called Liqid Inc. And we do something that's a little bit different. We do composable infrastructure, which we'll get into what that is a little bit later.
Sounds good.
Hey folks, I just want to let you know quickly about Netlify. Netlify is a really cool system for hosting what are traditionally known as static sites. However, the real benefit that I've been finding is that I don't have to mess with a back end. I can just set things up. I build the website out. I've been using a system called 11DJS, and you just deploy it. And then anything that you have that you want to do, you can do on the front end. So if you want to pull in some kind of database with Firebase or something else, if you want to collect form data, Netlify provides all kinds of services that make it easy to do all that stuff. If you're trying to do serverless, they have a really, really neat serverless setup that will allow you to deploy your websites without having to deploy a backend, and it'll do some of the work for you. I just love it. So if you're looking for a way that you can actually deploy a website that only has front-end technology in it, gives you all the tools that you typically need for the back end without having to actually program the back end, then give them a try. Go check them out at netlify.com.
Yeah, I guess so. To get started, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your background, sort of like getting into development and sort of how you got into Vue? I think that's a great place to start.
Sure. Despite having senior in my title, I'm actually fairly new to development. I graduated from a coding boot camp, specifically Galvanize, for anyone listening who is there right now. There's hope. In March of 2017, started working at Liqid in June of 2017. I've been here ever since. Prior to that, I actually worked at a quilt shop and played video games at night and streamed that. And I decided maybe it was time to grow up. And so I decided to try out coding, and I fell in love and found my purpose in life. But I actually didn't get into Vue until almost a year ago. We had the opportunity to do a greenfield rewrite of our app, and I weighed the options, and Vue is just the best. It fit the paradigm we needed just perfectly.
Nice. So what exactly were your needs?
So we have a real-time app, which means we're using WebSockets. So we needed something that it was going to be easy to make it dynamic. And as it turns out, the reactivity system in Vue is just, it makes my life so easy. Everything just updates. Yay.
And what do you mean by like real-time and dynamic exactly? Like what does that mean?
Okay, so we use WebSockets. Actually, we use a combination of standard HTTP requests and WebSockets. So in order to receive updated states, we use WebSockets. But in order to initiate state changes, we use HTTP requests over a REST API. So anytime there's anything that will update the state of the app, that just gets directly pushed over WebSocket to all clients. And because it's, just being plugged into Vuex, everything just magically updates.
Got it. So you never need to have like a refresh button that you like click on, and then it calls a method, and the method like uses Axios to go and like fetch new data, and then there's a loading screen, and then you like it updates, that kind of thing. It just like you just always have the most up-to-date data.
Every once in a while, I have to fake it while the back end is catching up. But that obviously only works in a single user situation. So we try to avoid ever actually having that in production. But yeah, basically, if you need to click refresh, we need to file a bug. Though generally, it's not me, just saying. They always say it is, but I swear it's not.
Got it. So like that, I'm sure that comes with like its own set of challenges. But have you also noticed that it like simplifies some problems that like you used to have to deal with? And then you just like never have to do that anymore?
Yeah, because so like once we establish exactly what the side effects of any action are, because, for us, one action can affect multiple sets of data. So once we've figured out all of the ramifications of any action, after that, should be pretty easy. At least no maintenance on my end, which is nice. So yeah, I don't have to worry about making sure that everything's up to date all the time because once I plug in the WebSocket, it just is.
And so for those of us that don't work with WebSockets that much, can you give like a quick 30-second on what WebSockets are?
Yes. So traditionally, WebSockets are used for bilateral communication where you can push data over the WebSocket and also receive data over the WebSocket. I believe it uses TCP connections. Don't quote me on that. But in our case, we're actually just using it for one-way communication, just pushing the data. Typically, if that's your paradigm, you're probably going to want to go with server-sent events. However, we were unable to support HTTP2, which meant that we were limited to 6 connections and we needed more than that. So we use WebSockets for the time being.
Fair enough.
Got it. Wow, that sounds complex.
Yes, it does.
Yes, I've had to learn a lot about event-driven architecture that I never thought I would, but turns out event-driven architecture is just really fascinating because, we all want to live that life where we never hit refresh and everything's just there and awesome. And yeah.
Yeah, no loading screens.
Yeah, no loading screens. If the data's wrong, I can just be like, someone on the back end, that's your bug.
When you say it's fascinating, the event-driven architecture, what have you found to be different, or what have been some revelations that you didn't expect?
Well, the really nice part is that once, when I do a post request, that's it. I'm done. The only thing that I use the .then handler on a promise for is basically just saying, hey, this is done. Or, if there was an error, I catch it. But, I don't have to then chain that into a GET request unless I'm faking it, in which case I absolutely do that. But yeah, the reality is there is still a lot of mental overhead for me as a developer because we're a very small team. And at the end of the day, it's sort of left to me to figure out what the UI needs in terms of data after any given action. But once that is documented, because that is key, because trying to keep track of that is really hard. We have beautiful tables for that. Once it's documented, it takes care of itself.
And are you using any kinds of libraries or other special tools in order to make that work easier? You mentioned you're using Vuex, so you're storing the state in Vuex. Is there anything you're doing that is particularly interesting or other people might find useful in order to work with the WebSockets?
So from my understanding, this isn't best practices. I know that the docs definitely suggest using Vuex.
That's how I know it's a real app.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Sometimes you just get it to work.
Exactly, yes. But I know that the Vuex docs definitely suggest using or creating a Vuex plugin for WebSockets. I do not do that. I actually just keep all of that in renderless components because for me, it was just easier to reason about the logic that was happening. And it was also easier to keep everything separate, and it made everything very explicit in terms of what was happening when a message was received and why and where the data was going. So maybe not best practices, but for me, I liked how explicit it was just to have it handled by a component.
Do you have any blog posts or any resources that you could share with people that go into more detail with that?
Unfortunately, no. The WebSockets was part of the app when I got here, which it was originally written in Polymer 1.x, which I haven't tried Polymer 2 or 3. I think 3 has been released now, but do not recommend Polymer 1, just saying.
I've heard similar stories.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sure Polymer is great for, small widgets and everything, but do not try to build an app with it. Just don't. You need the plumbing, and I personally enjoy hand rolling it. But no, I was already pretty familiar with WebSockets, so unfortunately, I don't have any useful things to tell people about that. We personally at Liqid use Stomp as our library for that, which I realize not a lot of people use that. I think most people are using Socket.io or Sock.js.
Yeah, what is Stomp? I don't think I'm familiar with it.
I don't know. It's a really old protocol. That's all I know. The documentation for it is incredibly simple, which honestly is pretty good. I like simple things. It's straightforward. Yeah.
That's not too bad.
But yeah, I mean, any WebSocket library is going to have, at least some similar interfaces. Like, there's going to be, a callback for when you receive a new message. You're going to tell it, how to connect. So honestly, it doesn't matter that much what library you're using. But yeah, so basically just Stomp and Vuex is all we're using. Oh, no, I lied. There is one page that uses D3.
I love D3.
Yeah.
Or at least I love its utilities. I don't love its rendering.
Right. And so we're not using Vue for rendering, which I very distinctly remember hearing you talk about that on a previous podcast. And I used to have another team member for the front end, but now I'm the only one. And I was like, hey, you should check that out, because he was a D3 guy, and I no. Like, yeah, you should figure out how to do that. He did not figure out how to do that, and I just avoid touching that code at all costs. But every once in a while, they make me, and I want to cry every time because I can't use Vue to do the fun stuff.
Yeah,
it makes me sad inside.
and D3's rendering model is like it is pretty complex. Like it takes most people, including myself, like some time to wrap your mind around like how it works and why it's working that way.
Yeah, no, I still don't really
I don't think it's the best. Yeah. I think that's the case for like most people who are using D3 to build stuff every day.
Yeah, no, I basically just like change things in the code and see what happens. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose.
That's basically my strategy for like coding.
I mean, come on, we've all done that for something at some point.
I mean, I change things and we see what happens.
Yeah, because how else are you going to really know how to break it?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great.
And you talked about, like at the beginning, a little bit about like composable infrastructure. Like what is that? Like what you said, like that's what you do at Liqid. You build like composable infrastructures or interfaces or something like that. Like what is that?
The super simple layman's version is I build software that lets you build physical supercomputers with like a few clicks. The long version is I build software that lets you compose bare metal servers over a PCIe fabric. Some people will know what that means, other people won't. So if you don't know what that means, supercomputers.
Whoa. So it's like drag and drop, build your own supercomputer or something?
And like literally when I started, we actually had drag and drop. We don't anymore because, I mean, that's just asking for carpal tunnel. I'm just saying. Why drag and drop when you can accomplish it with a single click? Got
it. Yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, basically, you create a machine and you can add any number of resources that you want to it. So like, let's say I want to be super awesome and I want 8 GPUs. I just add 8 GPUs. I add maybe a couple SSDs and I click done, and it electrically connects all of those devices to your CPU. And you can add more devices on the fly. It supports hot plugging. So it's pretty effing cool.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Amazing.
Yes. Especially since I didn't know anything about hardware when I started here. So the learning curve has been intense, but super exciting.
So I have to ask, what are these supercomputers for? Like, what are people using this for? It
has a variety of applications. AI is definitely a big one because of the number of GPUs that we can support. Basically, my understanding is there's no actual limit to how many GPUs that you can run on a single node. We've definitely successfully had 16 GPUs, or graphics cards for people who are like, GPU. But yeah, 16 graphics cards on a single processor, which is insane.
Wow.
Or machine learning, because you can dynamically change what devices are there. So for each sort of like step of machine learning, it has slightly different requirements. You just add those in as needed. I know that there are other use cases that I'm just totally blanking on. Rendering farms is one, especially because you can have lots of GPUs, and apparently people use those when they're rendering stuff. It's what I've heard.
rendering farms. So when they're like creating like complex like 3D models or something like that.
So like I think I heard somewhere like it takes like a month for a Pixar movie just to be rendered. A full month. Like that is a really long time.
Wow. Yeah. I'd hate for the power to go out during that month.
Right. Yeah. So, like I imagine they have generators. Like I hope anyway. But yeah. So
one person's job to just like 1 month of the year, just like look at a loading bar.
Oh my God. Yeah.
82%.
But yeah, so it helps speed up the rendering process. I think, if you can add more GPUs to that on a single processor, I think you can actually shave that down to like a week.
Do you know if anyone has tried to use Liqid for like crypto mining?
I won't lie. In-house, that is definitely a thing that happens.
I was saying with all the GPUs, it seems
so this is the real business, right? Like you don't even need to make money as like as Liqid. Like that's a front.
Yeah.
Really, what you're doing is you're mining crypto and then partying on yachts.
Yeah, and actually,
well, your money makes itself.
I think at one point we were exploring making like a specific mining rig and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, because I mean we have the ability to support like an insane amount of GPUs. Like why not? It's actually one of the test cases to test loading on GPUs that we use is crypto mining.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's practical.
Money while testing.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. That's great.
Yeah, I might get in trouble for admitting that, but whatever.
It's not illegal or anything. It's not like
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, like, it's not like we're running it like that all the time, but one cryptocurrency company actually sent us their internal mining software because it was super intense and they wanted to test it at scale. And we also wanted to test high loads on the GPU. So it was a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Wow. So like what kind of challenges does that present in the front end?
Yeah. So most of the state for, say, any given device. So as you might imagine, devices can have a lot of state. Like if it's a CPU, is it on? Is it detected? Or any number of things. All of that is actually expressed in Bitmasks because the back end or we'll call it like the bottom end because there's the Linux kernel, which we run on top of, then there's a REST API, then there's me. So core, which is the Linux part, everything is in Bitmasks, and I cannot tell you how long it took me to figure out how to actually do those in JavaScript. Previously, I was just pattern matching. I'm just like, is it an 8? Cool. Then it's on. But yeah.
Wow.
But also, I mean, it's really complex concepts that I have to figure out some way to make it look easy, which sometimes I can't, no matter how hard I try.
Yeah, there haven't been that many times that I've actually used them, like since learning about them in a computer science class.
Yeah, and I don't have a computer science background, so I was like, what? Now that I understand them, they're super useful.
Yeah, I didn't major in computer science, but like I did take some classes that I was interested in.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back and do that, but that is totally off topic. But yeah, and also, I mean, because we are a small company, I generally don't have like real requirements from the get-go. You know, we start a feature and we're all sort of exploring what it will actually be the end result. And oftentimes, you know, there are edge cases we hadn't thought about, which forces the feature to evolve. We'll say evolve because that's the nice word for it. Scope creep. But yeah, and you know, our CTO who still codes, he is a C guy. I don't know if you've met a lot of C programmers, but visuals are generally not their thing. You know, they think in this whole other dimension that I'm trying to understand. And like translating that into a useful, intuitive user experience. The biggest challenge is that it requires me to truly understand what the feature is and not coming from a computer science or hardware background. That sometimes takes a lot of time and, as I like to call it, marinating.
Yeah, so you probably have to like ask a lot of questions.
Oh God, so many questions. So one feature recently, I I think I went into the CTO's office to ask questions like at least 10 times. And it was usually like every other day or sometimes every day, I'd be like, I swear, one of these days, it'll be the end of the questions about this feature. I finally finished that feature. So I wasn't lying. I did eventually not have questions.
This sounds like such a simple thing, just like asking questions, but I feel like it's a skill that a lot of developers take a long time to learn, like how to ask questions about like what they should be building and like how this system works and like how the culture of like this like community works and like all that stuff. Like, do you have any tips or anything that you've learned that has made that easier for you?
I mean, like a lot of it depends on the person you're asking the questions to. And so I think perhaps that has been the most useful skill that I've developed is learning how to interact with a specific person. And that honestly, it does take just some time figuring out what they respond well to. Like, for example, some people have a tendency to get defensive when you ask questions because they think that you're pushing back on what they have put in place or pushing back on their ideas.
Like they have to justify like why they did things this way.
When in reality, I just don't understand because I don't understand. So I've learned that phrasing things like, just for my own edification, could you explain this to me? You know, making it very much about your desire for knowledge, not what they've done. But also just realizing that you can't ask all the questions all at once because you don't know everything when you're trying to ask those questions. Really, the most useful thing is figuring out what your unknowns are and trying to pry those out of whoever you are trying to gain the knowledge from. But sometimes it's not going to happen until a little late in the process. And that's super fun, let me tell you.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't know what to ask.
Yeah.
And you know. Yeah.
And sometimes you realize really late in the process, AKA it's been deployed at like one of the largest server companies in the world. And you realize that you didn't know something and now you have a giant bug in production. And hey, that's okay. It happens.
Yeah. Great advice. So I'm also curious in terms of asking questions, something I liked that you said is like, I went back to the CTO for the 10th time to ask about this particular thing.
Yes.
and I find a lot of people are kind of afraid to ask a question more than once or ask for clarification when they don't understand the first explanation. Because people like, I think we're all afraid sometimes of looking dumb.
I
guarantee there are a lot of people at home who like when you talked about, you know, the architecture stuff and you talked about like PCI and, you know, all these different things. Like
all these things that are really foreign to most of us.
I guarantee there are some people at home, and I'm talking to you now, people at home, that like felt dumb because you didn't know some things. And like, it's okay to not know everything.
Yes.
None of us know everything. And actually the only way to get smart is by like asking those questions or to get smarter.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you're dumb.
Smarter. I like
smarter.
That. No, and actually there was one situation recently where I just was truly not getting the concept that he was trying to explain to me. And it was the only time I've ever seen him get frustrated with me because, you know, he's like, this should be so obvious to you. And I'm like, it's really not. And so I kept trying to try to see if he could explain it in a different way that might stick. And eventually we did land on that. But the reality was it was an incredibly complex feature that I actually had to run. I had to write a kind of fun algorithm to solve. Yeah, I'm not even going to try to explain what it was because I will lose all of you. But no, it like reminded me of when I was learning how to drive. And when I was learning how to drive, my parents only had stick shift cars, which let me tell you, not fun to learn how to drive on. But my dad was trying to get me to understand the concept of, you know, letting the clutch out. And it just was not clicking until he tried a different method. So, I mean, if you aren't understanding it, approaching it from different angles to see if you get different responses is really helpful.
Yeah, so something that I used to do a lot, and I'm a little bit ashamed of, like when people would ask me a question and something seemed really obvious to me, I would just like repeat the same words that I had just said.
Yeah, no, like that's what was happening.
Which just makes people feel dumb.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not effective. And there are times when I still like slip up and I find myself doing that, not on purpose though. I really try not to do it because like it does make people feel dumb, and that's definitely not what I mean to do. And I definitely don't think the people I'm talking to are dumb. When I do that, I'm just kind of like struggling to find different words.
Right.
But like, how would you, like when you're working with people who are also going through that process and struggling to find like different words or a different way of explaining it and not sure where the disconnect is, how do you deal with that? Like, do you have any strategies?
Well, I'm usually the only one here who doesn't understand what's going on. but yeah, I mean, I have to have strategies for that. I usually find that backing up to the very beginning of whatever the interaction was, because generally a concept has many layers, right? Backing up to the very first layer and making sure that you understand all the assumptions of that layer and then going further. But I also think that it probably one of the things I do most is I state what my assumptions are on a topic. And I'm saying, correct me if I'm wrong, because that helps everybody get on the same page in terms of this is what I do understand. So help me fill in the gaps of what I'm not understanding.
Yeah. So that can help people identify like what's in your head, like when they're like not even sure like what's going on in your head and like how you're thinking about the problem. Yeah. But when you actually like repeat what you've understood back to them, like paraphrased, then they can see like, oh, okay, I see where the misunderstanding is. Like, it doesn't actually work like this. It's more like that.
Right. Yeah. It establishes a baseline of knowledge and a baseline of assumptions. I can't tell you how many times the miscommunication has been one person was assuming one thing and the other person was assuming another thing, and nobody communicated those assumptions to each other. And they were diametrically opposed. Like, oh, I thought it was this. No, it's this. So yeah,
it's actually the opposite.
Really helps, yeah. Especially when, you're in a situation where it's really quite foreign topics to you, but to do your job well, you have to have a really deep understanding of what's happening, making sure that your assumptions are correct and allowing the knowledge giver to correct any assumptions that are going to lead to a dark path.
Yeah. And I think like, I'm in that situation most of the time. I think a lot of developers are in that situation most of the time where like they don't understand the business side of things. Yeah. Like as much as the people who are like working in product development and working in sales and, working in marketing, so you have to ask a lot of questions. You're not in the trenches working directly with users a lot of times.
Yeah. And I find that if you don't understand or at least have some baseline of understanding of your user, it's really hard to create meaningful experiences for them because so like the market that I cater to is a very different market than most people. I cater to a market that's going to be extremely well informed on the software. Generally, it's not going to be in the hands of a noob like me. They're going to have a lot of background technical information that sometimes I just have to assume that they have that. I do try to handhold as much as possible, but there are certain concepts that I've literally been instructed, just assume they know this. I'm like, okay.
Gosh, if you're a noob, I'd hate to see what I would do that with that software. I'd probably accidentally trigger like a Terminator like scenario.
That's the other thing is
it's Skynet.
Basically, a lot of what I do is I baby-proof things. Nice. I soften the edges of foot guns that people might.
As a baby, I appreciate that.
Right, yeah. I do too, because I don't want to mess things up. Oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I've broken my own dev stack.
You want to make it hard to do things wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's super important. Like I provide a guided experience, because you can also use either the REST API or even the CLI. I give you the training wheels to figure out how things work, how to do things, and how to perform a workflow. And then, if you want to start creating scripts that do it automatically for you after that, cool. If not, you can keep using, the training wheels.
Yeah, and I actually find like it really helpful having people who aren't so immersed in the product, doing product development, like doing UX, doing development, because they actually get a chance to ask these questions and the assumptions that people have, because when you're building a business around an idea, you're often like a super, super expert on it.
Yeah.
And so there are so many things that seem obvious to you that won't be obvious to your users.
Yes.
And won't be obvious to people who are like just getting into this, who are like, who've been doing, like took a Udemy course on machine learning, and now they're like trying to do some stuff with machine learning, like for their company, for their university, whatever.
Yeah.
And they need some hand-holding. Like they could use some help figuring out how to understand these things.
So we were supposed to be done with the rewrite. I think the original target date was October of last year. It was like the last week of September, and I just happened to go to a UI UX meetup that I hadn't been to before. And the speaker said, does anyone have some designs that they would like feedback on? I'm like, yes, please, yes. And that was probably one of the most humbling experiences of my life, because everyone was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, oh God. But I mean, I was thankful to have that feedback prior to what was supposed to be the release. And the good news is it wasn't actually released until the first week of January this year. But that prompted us to take a really hard look at what our process was and where we could look to for feedback. So we actually dog fooded the app. It was an exhausting but fascinating experience to watch people use my software. And we had a lot of really great improvements that came out of that. So yeah, I would say that you have to take a step back from time to time and be like, how would you use this? Because how I would use it is so biased and full of assumptions that the user will not have.
Yeah, I agree. User testing is so important. There have been more times than I like to admit where, I've come out with a prototype for something and then showed it to users, or like written a first draft of docs and then showed it to someone. And then they're asked like, so what is it you're trying to do? Like they can't even figure out like what I am trying to explain, or what I'm trying to like make easy, or what people are supposed to do in this system.
Yeah. I mean, there were things that I thought were going to be so obvious that people really struggled with, like just finding this one button. Because, we had them go through a pretty basic workflow. And I mean, the first step was the hardest every time. So yeah, we improved how we guided the user to the first step of a workflow.
Yeah, when you've looked at a button and like clicked on a button for testing 10,000 times, it can be hard to imagine how like that button isn't obvious to everyone.
Well, yeah, especially when you have a heavily icon-based user interface. As it turns out, you're super used to those icons, but a new user has no idea.
Yep. It's just a bunch of different shapes.
Yes, especially in my realm where we have icons that represent, different types of devices and things like that. We try to make them intuitive, but there are limits to how intuitive we can make those things.
Yeah, that's tough. I also like have mixed feelings about icons. Like until you're really familiar with it. Unless it's like a super, super common icon, like a little X to close something.
Yeah, turns out that is pretty universal.
But I mean, apart from that, like there really aren't that many icons that just everybody understands. And even those cases, like I wouldn't say everybody understands like that the X means close.
Yeah, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, we have, your standard X icon to close things. But then we also have an X with a circle around it, and that's our cancel icon. So,
so you mean close or
definitely confuse things.
Which could all be different things in your system. Yeah.
So, we finally learned that actions had to have words next to the icon. For workflow navigation, we figured icons as a menu were okay, but when it came down to performing an action that had consequences, we should probably be very explicit about that.
Yep, I'm all for that as well.
For this project, I believe you also like completely rewrote it when you moved from Polymer to Vue, right?
Yes.
Like you just started from scratch.
Yes. Let's hear about this.
What was your decision, or how did you make that decision to do a complete rewrite rather than like a sort of a gradual migration?
So, well, among other things, we also did a complete visual redesign when we did the rewrite, because we had designed ourselves into a corner with the first one. We just sort of ran out of places to put things. So we learned a lot about that, because it was actually originally intended to be solely a desktop app. So we also use Electron. I forgot to mention that, mostly because we haven't actually shipped that to a customer yet. Someday. But so it very much had a desktop app feel, like very confined to the window. Scrolling wasn't really a thing. Pagination was the thing, which pagination's hard, just saying. Yeah, anyone who's tried it knows. Or at least anyone who's tried to hand roll it, oh God.
It's like a hazing ritual every developer should go through.
Oh God, yeah. No, it's God, pagination bugs. I am so glad those are no longer a thing I deal with on a daily basis. Because it was literally like whack-a-mole with that.
That's great.
Yeah.
It really is.
But anyway, moving on. So yeah, we had basically designed ourselves into a corner. So we kind of needed a fresh slate. To be fair though, when I say we designed ourselves into the corner, that's a royal we. My previous teammate and I were hired. We started the same day, and we were handed this app that was written by people who had never written a web app before. Yes. So the previous CEO had written all of the HTML and CSS, stuff he was completely self-taught while also being the CEO of the company. So I'm pretty sure he was very sleep deprived anytime he was writing that. And the JavaScript was written by my boss, who is a Java guy, and just thought, hey, it would be fun to do JavaScript. He no longer thinks that that's fun. When I inherited it, there was no state management. It was an absolute nightmare. Like, I think I counted, there were places where state was being passed down like 8 levels deep or more. Yeah, I think there was definitely some that were more than that.
Oh.
Yeah, no. So trying to backtrack to find where any state originated was a nightmare. So at that point, I was like, hey guys, Redux, we should do that. That made it easier, but we kept running into bugs with Polymer and timing of updates. And it just kept happening. And there were some things that we just couldn't fix. There were some race conditions that it might happen. Nothing I can do. Sorry. So yeah, honestly, I wanted to rewrite that app since like the first week I started, because it was a mess. It was. Oh, we cleaned it up a lot along the way, but my boss, he never wanted to write it in Polymer, so he was.
So it was just like it was slowing down development so much that it was actually faster to write it from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah. It like that was really, we were like, guys, there's not much we can do. Like we can't really add new stuff. So either you let us do the rewrite or it's going to be really weird. And it turns out the core team, they were porting over to a different version of Linux. So the timing just sort of lined up where there was going to be no new large features for several months. And we were given the green light to do it, which honestly, I never thought would actually happen. I pestered a lot for it, but you just never imagine that you'll live the dream of a greenfield rewrite.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. And most of the time I don't recommend it, but it sounds like in this case, like
it was necessary.
It was probably the right decision. Yeah.
It really was. But as it turns out, even with a greenfield rewrite, you're still going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah.
I mean, you try to learn from your mistakes. You try to learn from other people's mistakes as much as possible, but you're still going to make mistakes and you're still going to have tech debt. Turns out, we accrued tech debt pretty fast. That's a thing that happens because, we started by trying to write tests, for everything. We want to be like, so good, do all the right things. And I mean, we had a really good foundation with Vue Enterprise boilerplate. Thank you, Chris.
Happy to help.
But that could only take as far as the developer's willing to go. And turns out we were running out of time, so tests kind of fell by the wayside. I've started trying to go back. But actually, the biggest mistake we made was layouts were all float-based. Don't ask me why in 2018 we were using float-based layouts, but we were.
Hey, I mean, if it works, but there are definitely better alternatives.
I'm not sure it did. So yeah, I'm actually, right now, I'm going back and trying to refactor them all to use Grid, which is super awesome. It's so satisfying.
I love Grid.
It's amazing.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Oh, speaking of it, now I have something for my picks, actually.
Yeah, we had Miriam on the other week. Miriam Suzanne.
Love her.
Talking to us about me too. Huge fan. And she was talking about like a lot of underused CSS features, CSS Grid being one of the biggest ones, like that can just simplify people's life. Well, I mean, I guess if you
it was really hard to grasp
that don't support it. But even then, like you could have fallbacks.
Yeah, float-based layouts, and everything is based on a SAS variable that is just 24 pixels. We call it grid size. And literally the entire layout was based on this one thing. So that's been really fun to try to remedy, because right now we have a problem. Most people are like, we need the app to scale down. Our app doesn't scale to large screens, which at trade show, they're using 4K monitors. Turns out it doesn't look good on a 4K monitor. So I have to tell them, like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to set it to 1080p. I will get to that eventually, but for now I'd have to break everything and I can't. All right.
And no one told me to support 4K.
Right. Yeah, no, but I actually, I'm kind of excited to tackle that problem, though I figured out the best way is incremental. You know, whenever I have downtime, I pick a component and I'm like, well, let's make that grid. And so I'm just like working from the inside out. So I pick like the smaller components, make those grid first, and then they're wrappers. And then one day the whole thing will be grid.
That's a good way to do it. Yeah. So that you don't have to just like stop and rewrite everything.
Yeah. Cause I mean, we got that opportunity once. We clearly squandered that. So can't ask for that again. But I figure, it doesn't take very long to, refactor a small thing into a grid layout. And trying to just refactor all of your layouts to grid all at once, I feel like you would just really hate grid at the end. And I don't want that. I just don't. Because right now I love it.
And going directly from floats to a lot of things to grid, I feel like that's sort of like jumping a couple centuries in technology.
Right? Yeah. Like we just skip right over Flexbox. No big deal.
It's sort of like going from like, I don't know, from a horse to like a fighter jet.
Or Tesla. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, horse to Tesla.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah. The mental model totally works.
And my phone, like I always have trouble syncing my phone to the horse.
Right, yeah.
It doesn't seem to work. I think it's maybe like a different version of Bluetooth or something. I haven't figured it out. I'm still talking to the horse breeder, but we'll troubleshoot it.
But so as it turns out, you're still going to make mistakes in a greenfield rewrite. But as long as you're learning from those mistakes, that's really all that matters. And I've learned a lot from my mistakes of other people, and I'm a better developer for it. So I encourage people to make mistakes. I really do. And
I feel like if you're not making mistakes, you need to find a new job because you're not growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I first started at the coding boot camp, like they told us, if you're not failing, you're not learning. And I'm like, whatever, I'm super smart. I don't fail. That didn't last long, let me tell you. So I had a capstone project at the very end, and the night before I was supposed to present it, it just stopped working completely. Like something happened where it couldn't pull the cookies that had their credentials. Like it was just like, that doesn't exist. Like cookies aren't a thing. Screw you. And it's like 2 a.m. at this point, the day I'm supposed to present. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm a failure. I'm a complete failure. This is the worst. I have nothing to present. I think at the time it seemed like a really reasonable response to be crying hysterically. In retrospect, maybe it was a little dramatic, but I'll never forget my instructor. She was like, just present what you presented yesterday in your mock. And I was like, what? Because, it wasn't done when we did our run-throughs the day before. And so I just talked about the intent of it, the experience thus far, how working with bleeding edge technologies sometimes maybe not the best option when you're on a short time frame. And so, I ended up just presenting on the value of failure because I finally understood if you're not failing, you're not learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like my first probably few years of development, I was atrocious at estimating.
Oh yeah, no.
There's something that I thought would take 1 hour and it would take 2 days.
Yep.
Like that bad.
Yeah, I'm either way over or way under. I'm super excited. Recently, I estimated a feature at 20 hours. I was within 20 minutes of it. I was like,
nice.
Yeah, right? Yeah, that's never going to happen again.
So what are changing topics a little bit, what were some features of Vue as you were building this Greenfield project that you found especially useful for building the kind of interface that you were building?
Oh my God. Probably the two most useful things are V4, because we have a lot of lists of things to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to just be like, just map all that and render it. Thank you. And computed properties. Oh, computed properties are life. Just life.
Can I buy that t-shirt somewhere?
Right? Yeah. No, someone should make that. One of the listeners do that. I'm not gonna. Come on. No, because for example, we have the very first screen that you see in our app is this monstrosity. Okay, under the covers, it's a monstrosity that is built with recursive functions to essentially map 3 separate data sources into a hierarchy.
Uh-huh.
Computed properties. I have a method that builds it, and I just call that method and pass in the 3 different data sources, and it's just always up to date. And that's it.
You don't have to worry about rerunning it when one of those sources changes or anything like that.
I don't even have to remember exactly what that method does anymore because it's
that's
there. Yeah, no, God, that literally, it took me a day to write just that method.
I believe it.
Yeah. God, what else do I love about Vue? What don't I love? Okay, actually.
You mentioned some features like pagination. Are there any Vue features that you'd say are really helpful for handling features like pagination?
Oh, I don't know. We don't do pagination.
Actually, could you go into a little bit more detail first about some of the problems you encountered with pagination?
Oh, God. Just keeping track of where the user was. Because, we had to keep track of the page when new items were added and make sure we highlighted the right item. Turns out a lot of our issues with that specifically were scope related. We were trying to do everything in one component, when if we had, made the items in the list their own component, that gave us access to a more limited scope of logic where we could just compare hey, so in our state, we have the selected item and it's this identifier. So then the component that's representing that item can be hey, is that my ID? Nope, I'm not selected. Oh, hey, that is my ID. I'm selected.
Yeah. But if you're reusing that for every single step, every single page, then you also have to keep track of maybe previously selected item, and you have to keep track of like what was the previous thing, or maybe you have to like have an array of like all of the selected indexes, and then it's all being managed inside of one component, which becomes very complex.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you maybe change the order of some steps, and then like, oh, the index is actually different, so we have to try to migrate the state.
Now we just let you scroll on lists. It just makes life so much easier for me. But actually, one thing that Vue let us solve is, because it is a real-time system and I literally don't display state unless that state has been explicitly reported, there's going to be some latency when moving things around. You know, like when I'm adding GPUs to a machine, there's a certain round trip time that has to happen before I'm like, oh, yep, it's in the machine now. Transitions and transition groups. Because literally I can mask that by sliding over the item towards the next list and having it slide into that list. So everything looks very smooth and seamless, and as opposed to having the user like click and just nothing's happening. I'm like, did I click on that? Because there's nothing worse than that moment when there's no feedback when you click something.
I had that moment earlier today, actually.
Yeah.
Someone was showing me like a side project that they work on. It's like, so I tried to sign up and I clicked on sign up and nothing seemed to happen.
No, yeah, it's the worst. Actually, that particular instance where we're moving things across lists is the only time that I directly manipulate the data. It's sort of like it's like trapeze artists, you know, like when the one is like, you know, jumping off of theirs to be caught, I have to just trust that my partner, the back end, is going to do the right thing and that item is going to show up in the other list. Because I'm just like, okay, take it out. I hope it appears over there. Actually, every once in a while, it'll peekaboo back into the list because it's on like a 1 second pulling mechanism. And so sometimes it'll update the list before it's actually moved. I'm like, oh no, devices love playing peekaboo. What? Because I'm not great at CSS, the transitions made my life really easy. I love how explicit they are. You're just like, you are this transition. Boom. Done.
Yeah, we also had Crystal Campione on recently in an episode not too long ago, talking about like how awesome transitions are and transition group, and just the beautiful things that she creates with them.
Oh, and like the list move. Oh my God, that was life-changing. Literally like one line of CSS, and when I sort a list, it just like looks super
automatically
cool.
Animates.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
With an automatic flip transition.
Yes. That blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like I actually, that particular area of the docs was probably the thing that pushed me over the edge towards Vue when we were deciding what framework to go towards. Because I was like, what? That's amazing.
That Sudoku demo, do you know what I'm talking about? Like that's one of those demos where like after I built it, I just started like playing with it for a few hours.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not gonna lie. I may have at least spent a solid 5 minutes just trying to win.
Yeah.
Pointless.
No, it doesn't tell you when you win either. It doesn't tell you when you win. I try to keep it pretty simple. So like I thought about trying to add that, but it's like, nah, that's just gonna, you know, make the example more complex and it'll be a distraction.
But yeah, no, that demo, it's solid gold. Solid gold.
The demo was pretty easy to make, fortunately, because of like how awesome like the feature inside of Vue is, and how much it just like does the work for you.
Yeah, no, that one blew my mind. But yeah, just the reactivity system in general is just so powerful and useful for a real-time app, because I need everything to be reflected exactly as it is in my single source of truth at any given moment. And Vue just takes care of that for me, so I don't have to think about things because I have enough to think about.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Don't we all?
Yeah. No, and I've been told, I've never used React, but I've been told that sort of thing is a heck of a lot harder to implement in React. I'm like, whew, yeah, good thing that was never on the table, because that just looked like too much of a learning curve for two people who have never used it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of React and was actually a React consultant for a couple of years before I started using Vue. And I definitely did spend more time solving like problems in React, like specific to React applications, rather than just focusing on like the business problem, like what I need to do. And that was for me personal, my personal experience.
Yeah, I love that Vue lets me just focus on the important things, which is creating the user experience. Like I'm not having to fight with it constantly, which it felt like with other frameworks, I was always fighting with the framework to get it to do what I needed it to do. And Vue just does what I need it to do.
Not always. Not always.
Yeah, I was like, but like 90% of the time, it does it.
Going back to pagination a little bit, like you mentioned, you had one big component that was managing all the pages, and then it just like was way too complex. Oh my God. And then you split that out into separate components.
Yeah.
Were you using something like a component with the is attribute in order to switch between the components, or how were you doing that?
Oh, this was actually in Polymer. We no longer do pagination because that was too hard.
Okay.
But actually, as it turns out, Polymer and Vue share a lot stylistically, which is actually another reason why we went with Vue, because the mental model was pretty similar. Pretty similar to the style of programming that we were already using. But so, the is component makes life a lot easier, especially because we have different devices, but each device, like it has a generic wrapper and then slots specifically in it. But sometimes I don't know what needs to go in the slot. So I literally combined the dynamic components with slots. And I'm pretty sure I just blew most people's minds because those are the two things most people hate.
Yeah, for people who like need to know like what to Google to figure out like what we're talking about, if you Google like Vue dynamic components, like you'll find like a link to the docs that says like dynamic and async components, and you just click on that and you can read all about it.
It's really powerful when you need it. I wish I had. That's the other thing. So Vue lets you become functional with very little knowledge to begin with. You know, you can implement things with maybe not the greatest patterns, but it still works. It might not be the most maintainable code, but it gets you where you need to go to start with. And then I've noticed that like as I've gotten more proficient and I've dug deeper into, you know, some of the more powerful patterns that you can utilize in Vue, I literally have a list of things I want to refactor to use more maintainable patterns. But yeah, I mean, when I first started writing our app, I was like, I feel like dynamic components have some value here, but I don't understand them well enough. So maybe I'll come back to that later. And then, eventually I was like, okay, this is how it fits in. This is how we need to design it to make it fit in. And this is how it's going to make my life easier moving forward. So I like that it sort of lets you level up incrementally. Like you can make it work. But if you want to make it awesome and maintainable, here you can dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that's definitely very, very conscious on our part. We try to structure things so that you're getting, ideally, like the most power for the least effort at every single step.
Yes. And I like that the docs were organized like that as well. Like, you know, component basics, the docs also huge reason why we picked Vue. Because I mean, like I felt like I had a solid grasp after just reading through the guide. I was like, okay, I feel like I know how to use this, or at least, you know, I knew enough to be dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and actually, we only used the docs really to get started. We didn't do any courses or anything. So, I mean, if the docs are enough to get us started on rewriting a large app, like that is a testament to you, Chris, and all of the contributors to the docs, which, what's it up to now? 300, 400?
Oh, yeah, hundreds. And the other members of the docs team, like, Sarah Drasner and Natalia Tepluhina, Anfan, like they do incredible work. And
thank you all.
Yeah, and our translators, it's a lot of people who have contributed to making it as good as it is and keep making it better.
Now, whenever like I have to look at documentation for like some library, I'm like, oh, these are just awful. But no, I mean, I've run into the situation recently where I'm looking at some docs. I'm just like, I realize that this is supposed to help me understand what's going on, but I'm actually more confused now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. The docs, I mean, surely that's probably one of the biggest reasons that Vue has been as successful as it is.
I agree.
Yeah. So Chris, you're awesome. Everyone else who contributes.
Yeah, and
you're awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a team effort. Like my first drafts of documentation are usually at that point that I was talking about before, where people are trying to figure out what were you trying to do? What is the point of all of this?
But I mean, there has to be a first draft.
And then I can try to make it better.
And then, when people collaborate to make that first draft into something awesome and understandable.
Yeah.
Someone had to write the first draft, Chris. Someone had to.
Really, a big part of my personal process is just iteration and user testing. And, being honest with yourself about like what is working for people and what's not, and not falling in love with certain explanations, because you have to be ready to get rid of it if it doesn't work for other people, even if you think it's really elegant.
Yes. No, actually, that's probably one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn, being, the sole owner of my code base at this point, is learning how to swallow my pride. Because, there are times where I'm like, but this is awesome and I worked really hard on it. But if it doesn't work for the user, it doesn't work for the user.
I think that's one of the most important things as a developer or like a product developer. Just learning to be okay with having done something that didn't work. Yeah,
we used the art director, who has since moved on to another job. He always used to say, "Don't be afraid to kill your babies," which was a rather harsh,
dramatic way of putting it.
Yeah, very dramatic. But I was like, but it made sense, because so often we get emotionally attached to these things that we create. And, I don't have any children, but I've been made to understand that people get emotionally attached to babies. So,
yeah.
I mean, obviously less emotional attachment with something created like that's a feature or something. But yeah, I always thought that was really excellent advice. However, it can be a lot harder to do that in practice than in theory.
Yeah, there are times when I spent like 2 days on a really awesome demo, and then I find out like, okay, this example actually isn't really connecting with people, and someone suggested this like example that took them 30 seconds to create, and it actually works much better. Like people respond, it tests much better. Like people understand the concept. And so I have to like throw away the thing that I spent 2 days on, even though like, I felt some attachment to it.
It's really hard, especially because, like I'm all alone. So sometimes I end up in this sort of like echo chamber, because obviously I'm going to tell myself what I want to hear. And so like I'll like bring up the idea to someone else and they're like, "No, I don't like that. What? No." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't like it either. I just, thought Or like sometimes, someone, like one of the testers will come to me requesting a feature. And I'm like, "Yeah, no, that sounds like a really great idea. I love it." So I implement it. And then I show it to the CTO and he was like, "No, take that out." And I'm like, and then he'll explain his side. I'm like, "Oh, actually, yeah, no, it's a really good point. Sorry, I didn't think of that. Got it."
Yep.
I figure, learning from mistakes again. That's really just the theme of being a developer.
It really is.
Which sucks because, man, for most of my life, I was absolutely paralyzed by a fear of failure. So I've really had to embrace failure.
Yeah, that is tough. I mean, we've talked a lot about that sort of like fear of failure and fear of like seeming dumb.
Yes.
As well.
Like literally my greatest fear.
I think those are related.
But yes, no, they totally are.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate trying new things because I might look stupid. I don't go to the gym because I might look stupid.
And it's so funny too, because like we go to the gym, like if you're going to the gym for the first time, it's because like you feel like you're kind of out of shape.
Right? Yeah, no, it's like I'm more like judged. This sucks.
You're going because you have stuff to work on.
Yeah. No, gyms scare me.
But as a developer, have you found any strategies? Do you have any tips on how you deal with that and not get sort of stuck in your head and afraid to like do new things?
I definitely have to remind myself
and ask questions.
that we all suffer from imposter syndrome. Like, if someone says that they don't, they're lying. They're an imposter. Just saying. Because yeah, we get in our heads and we think, oh my God, what if I don't actually know anything? And actually, Chris saw me do this recently, and he gave me a great pep talk to remind me, it's okay. None of us know what we're doing. I'm like, yeah, that's a really good point. None of us do. But yeah, I guess just realizing that you're not alone in that feeling. And most of us have looked stupid at some point, and we're going to be pretty sympathetic towards that because we're like, oh, yeah, you're so relatable. Yeah, been there, done that. Because, yeah, I am a pretty anxious person, which doesn't help with the whole fear of looking stupid. But, I mean, really, there's something to exposure therapy. Figuring out what the worst case scenario is and making it happen. Like, bombing my capstone project, that was literally worst case scenario. And it still turned out really well. Like, some of my cohort, they were in tears after I spoke about it. I was like, oh, no, you're going to make me cry again. I don't have many tears left. Like, I'm dehydrated. Stop that. I know, it was actually funny. Like, a lot of women came up to me after and said that they were amazed that I got through my presentation without crying. And I'm like, oh, no, you don't understand. I'm literally just dead inside right now.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll cry later.
Yeah. Like, I don't have the energy.
I'll cry a lot later. As soon as I leave, like, actually, in about 2 minutes, I might leave to go to the bathroom and just cry in there.
I felt really good about it because I found the value in my failure. And I guess, like, really, fail. That's the best way to get over that, is to just fail and realize it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. And it's probably going to be something really good that comes out of it, oddly enough.
And find value in your failure. I think that's a good tip too. And like for asking questions, I think it's similar. I think you can find like value in your ignorance. It actually gives you a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have. Like you can get so in the weeds when you just like know the product, know the domain so well that like you just build the perfect interface for you.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm what matters.
But when you can look at it from more of a beginner's mindset, there's a lot of power in that. So I think it's good to be grateful for our ignorance and grateful for the chance to like ask these dumb questions or questions that we're worried might make us seem dumb.
Yeah, no, and especially like working here where I know less than everyone around me. I'm just sort of over it. I'm like, yeah, everybody knows that I don't know this stuff, but everybody knows I'm trying. And that's what matters.
I would even challenge that. I bet the other people on the team don't know as much about what's going on in the front end as you do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. To be fair.
They know more about what they do.
I actually know more about the entire app's architecture than anyone else because I have to understand exactly what happens from the bottom up. Because if something's going wrong, I need to know where. I actually would say in that respect, app architecture, I am the master. I am a goddess. But when it comes to like, nitty gritty of hardware, like PCIe registers, I'm not even sure that's really a thing. I'm like, nope. I'll learn that when I need to know it. And it turns out eventually I need to know those things. But then I often forget them later.
But at least like, you can learn like, vague phrases like, there's something about PCIe registers. And it's like, I know it's like, when there's something like that, I don't know what that is still, but like we go to this part of the app and we figured it out.
Yeah, I've also sort of realized.
I need to talk to Lisa to figure out like exactly how that part works just to fix the bug, but I know where to look.
I know where to look. I know where to poke things to see where it hurts.
Enough to be
generalities really. Well.
Yeah. I mean, it probably wouldn't be useful to spend time to become like
a hardware
more of an expert on all of these different things that other people are doing, like more than them.
Yeah, basically, I just have to know how everything fits together. What makes that puzzle piece, I don't necessarily know, but I know what that puzzle piece is.
Yeah, I think learning enough to ask questions.
Yes.
Definitely.
Gosh, do you have any tips about that too, Ben?
As far as asking questions?
As far as like getting over imposter syndrome and feeling like okay to ask dumb questions, feeling okay to like try something that you might fail at. Like I know that's something you've given on advice on before as well.
I think he experienced it the first day of VueConf with the jokes. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, I actively still continue to wrestle with that. I think it's really hard these days, especially with the internet, that you're like, well, I should be able to Google this myself. So then there's this like double like standard of like, well, I should be smart enough to research it because Google has everything. So why am I going to ask somebody a question if I can just Google it? And it's this weird like line that you're always trying to teeter. But, I think I saw a tweet recently that was great. It's like sometimes you just want that human connection. It just helps to better explain things. Like, yes, technically, if you Google enough, theoretically, you will find it at some point. But a lot of times it's just faster to have that just ask in person and those sort of things. To Ari's point, though, a lot of it is, though, like find someone that is good at sort of creating that safe environment for you, because there are people who, if you ask the wrong person, they can be very condescending and it can have that backlash. So especially if you're new to this, start with people you're comfortable with and work your way up to, random strangers that you're asking questions to.
Yeah. Although with people like that, as you get to know people better, I think it's really good to communicate like what an effective way to communicate to you will be. And that's why like I'm glad people have told me in the past, like, you know what, and when you just like, when I say like I don't understand, can you like try to like rephrase that? And I just like say exactly what I just said again. It makes them feel really stupid. Mm-hmm. Like I'm glad that people talk to me about that because I don't want to make them feel that way. But also like on the flip side, and especially with people I don't know as well, when I'm asking a question and they like seem frustrated or seem annoyed, mm-hmm. I try to remember that like this is a frustrating situation where like there's some kind of disconnect and we don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And I try to remember that, they might be frustrated at the disconnect and they might even be like projecting some of that onto me in this moment.
Yeah.
But I know that the only way to improve our relationship is to push past that and try to figure out like where it is and, try to remain calm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that being a good question asker is also really feeds into being a good question answerer. Because our art director here is trying to learn Vue to help me out a little bit on the app. And his JavaScript knowledge is pretty limited. Like he has pretty good HTML and CSS skills, having worked at marketing agencies in the past. And I've learned that, he'll ask a question and that 9 times out of 10, my response is another question, like trying to gauge his baseline, what he's tried, gauge his understanding of the problem, so that I'm not, diving right in and skipping over parts he doesn't already understand.
Yeah.
Because it's the curse of knowledge. We're like, oh, that's super obvious. I know what that is. But you have to remember that you had to build up to that too. And so figuring out where they are in that process is super helpful for me, at least, to give a meaningful answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that too. Like if I'm not careful, if I'm not mindful, I can get caught in the weeds. Like if someone asks like, oh, like how do I use a dynamic component? I might, jump into like a whole explanation. And if I don't ask questions or if I don't give them a chance to like jump in, they might wait patiently. And then after 20 minutes, they say like, no, I mean like in this case. Yeah. I know what it is.
Context is huge. Because someone once told me, don't ask how you implement a solution. Explain your problem. Mm-hmm. Because all the time, like there's so many times where you're like, how do I write a for loop when really .map is the better solution? But without the context, no one could have told you that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think as we wrap things up, Ari, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on Twitter at GloomyLumi. That's GLOOMYLUMI.
That's a lovely screen name. I love that.
We'll make sure to drop that in the show notes. Chris, do you have any final questions for Ari before we wrap up and move on to picks?
That's it for me.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume, you spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/react. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
I guess let's do picks. Chris, would you like to go first?
No, but sure. I can.
I can go first. That's fine.
Yeah, sure. You go first. Yeah.
All right. We were talking about grids earlier. So my pick for this week, Sarah Drasner released a CSS grid generator that she made. It's pretty awesome. So we'll be dropping that in the show notes. And my fun pick for this week is for those who watch like the Hayao Miyazaki and sort of his animated films like Poyo or Spirited Away. It's Spirited Away. And there's a documentary that's online that's completely free on sort of that follows him around. Definitely worth checking out. So those are my picks for this week. Do you want to go, Chris?
Sure. Yeah, I think I only have one pick, which is not something I've really played around with yet, but it's something that Divya Sasidaran shared on Twitter, frequent host of this podcast, called ZDog, which you can find at zzz.dog, which is, it's described as a round, flat, designer-friendly pseudo 3D engine for Canvas and SVG. And if you don't know what that means, just imagine like these cool, like cartoony 3D models that you can use more easily than you think.
Yeah, Dave DeSandro made that. Oh my God, I love him. He's great.
So I'll share that in the show notes.
I'm going to have to look into that.
And Ari, what are your picks for us this week?
Okay, I have 3 picks. All of them have played some journey or some part in my journey as a developer. The first one is going to seem weird, but it's a band, Explosions in the Sky. It's really great coding music. I have listened to them for countless hours while coding, and as a really good introductory album, The Wilderness. The genre is post-rock, and if you're not familiar with what that is, think of it like rock stars got older and chill. It's purely instrumental. Explosions in the Sky is definitely purely instrumental because I don't know, I have ADHD, so words while programming cannot. But yeah, so highly recommend them. Explosions in the Sky. My second pick, this organization is the reason I'm even on this podcast, Vue Vixens. I got to go to VueConf thanks to a scholarship ticket from them. They are an amazing organization who tries to teach Vue to people who identify as women and women. And I also highly recommend their Slack channel. It is the best. Chris was talking about, a safe space to ask questions. It is a safe space to ask questions, and I love that about it. And my third pick is something I just completed, Grid Critters, which is a game, if you guys aren't familiar with it, by Dave Geddes. I just finished it yesterday. Super proud of myself.
Nice.
But yeah, for me, like Grid was super confusing. Like if you just look at like the MDN docs, you're just like, wait, what? Do not understand. And I love video games, so it sort of seemed like a natural choice. But I am a Grid master now, so I highly recommend Grid Critters if you're struggling with Grid.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Great resource. Thank you.
All right. Well, I guess that's it for this episode of Views on Vue. Thanks for joining us. And until next week, enjoy the Vue.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.